Hiya folks, how's it going? After my recent rear-wheel drive guide, I got a few comments to do R2 class or the KitCar class next, or front-wheel drive in particular. And it's also the logical next step to do a guide about front-wheel drive, so this is exactly what that is. It's particularly much shorter than the one for rear-wheel drive, in case you wondered, because there is not much to explain. Front-wheel drive is very predictable to drive. I picked the KitCar class as a reference because they are by far the fastest front-wheel drive cars, and the same rules apply to all of them. Basically, the general rule is you drive like you are on tarmac, so tarmac racing line, no matter where you are. If you drive on ice, if you drive on snow, if you drive on gravel, if you drive on heavy or loose gravel, or if you're actually driving on tarmac, you always drive like you are on tarmac. That's basically it. That is how you do front-wheel drive. I will go into more detail, but if that would be wasting your time, you can turn off now. If you know everything about tarmac driving, this is what you need to know. Drive everywhere like you are on tarmac. The front-wheel drive can't do any more than that. It's physically not capable of having more finesse in the driving capability. To go now into more detail, the thing is, if you try to drift a front-wheel drive car, you will find out that it's not possible. If you go hard in the steering, it just goes straight, or it understeers like crazy. It will turn, of course, but it will not break into a drift, and you cannot maintain a drift, nor initiate a drift by throttling. You can only initiate slides by handbrake turns or by weight shifting, like a Scandinavian flick, but you can never initiate any slide by throttle, let alone keep a slide by throttle. And if you look at it, it becomes quite obvious why that is the case. The front wheels are the only thing moving your car, which means instead of pushing anything like you need for a slide to be maintained and actually being a drift, you're just pulling the car. Your only power contact to the ground is in the front of the main part of your vehicle. So you're pulling along like you're pulling on a chain, and nothing will change this configuration. You're always pulling your car. You're never pushing. Unless you're driving backwards, of course, but good luck getting to any speed like that. The major culprit for these vehicles lies in the fact that you also need to steer with those same front wheels. So if you put all the power to the front wheels, you're pulling along your vehicle, the weight will shift towards the back and releases quite a bit of grip on your front wheels, which will in turn limit your ability to corner. And if you lose the grip on the front wheels, you will corner not as well, which means you will understeer. So basically it's always like if you turn and put too much throttle on front wheel drive, you will understeer. You get off the throttle and the car will start to steer more. Basically like you would drive on tarmac. Just drive like on rails, on the racing line, and keep the car straight. If it happens that the car will initiate a slide, which in this case would be unintentional, you can fix this by applying more throttle, actually, and countersteering, because, as explained, you are pulling the car. If you increase the pull, it will pull itself straight, right on its own. No other finesse required to fix such a case. Well, I mentioned you can force the car into a slide, though, with handbrake pull, but let that not fool you. This would not be a drift because you can still not maintain any slide with your driving configuration. So what happens if you pull the handbrake? Your car will just slide. If you apply more throttle, it will pull itself right straight again in the direction you were originally going, because the momentum of your car is still aligned in the same direction, and you cannot change that unless you slow down. This means there's basically only one reason to ever pull the handbrake in front-wheel drive, and that is in those corners that are so tight that you would come to a full stop anyway. Because then you can reorient your car before the turn-in and point in the direction where you want to accelerate out of the turn, but you would have to let it slide to almost complete stop and then accelerate out of it, because otherwise it will try to snap back into its original motion. Apart from that, if the corner allows at least some bit of carrying momentum through it, just drive racing line. There is no point in handbrakes. Even on those very tight turns, even on gravel, even on those hairpins in Greece, they are all wide enough that I haven't encountered one where the handbrake would be required. You can drive them all racing line and be quicker this way with a front wheel drive, because you cannot maintain slides anyway. So what this all boils down to is that the behavior of front wheel drive cars is much more monotonous. There are not as many cases. I'm not to say it's easier to drive a front wheel drive car, because some of the corners really benefit from being able to slide around them, and it's actually, in my opinion, more difficult to drive some of them on the racing line. But it's easier to judge what you want to attempt. You don't have to think about how to engage a corner, because you always try to engage every corner in the same way. It's also not to say that front-wheel drive cars are particularly slower because of that. I will give you that they are slower on loose surfaces, especially because they can't maintain any drifts, and this is where drifts, especially around hairpins, really give you a benefit. But they are on par if it comes to tarmac, because in the other drivetrains you would drive in the same way on the same racing line as front-wheel drive cars. For example, in Spain, the F2 KitCars, at least in dry conditions, not when it's raining, in dry conditions, the F2 KitCars are amongst the fastest in the game. To already wrap it up, try to avoid any slides, catch slides by applying more throttle, and drive everywhere, regardless of surface, like you are on tarmac, and drive racing line. That is how you drive front-wheel drive cars quickly, anywhere. Thank you, and see you next time. Cheers.